I think of overexpansion risk. You are increasing your risk dramatically because you're moving fast and furious. You still have all of those balls you're juggling. There's a higher probability one of those is going to drop from a higher distance and it's going to smash, make quite a thud.
In this episode, we discuss the critical process of scaling a venture, exploring the strategic steps required for sustainable growth. We delve into the challenges entrepreneurs face during expansion and provide actionable insights on how to successfully manage resources, operations, and market demands as the business scales.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Professor Palin. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. We've gotten together today to talk about scalable business models. It's a topic that'll be interesting to our listeners because we've talked a lot about the differentiation between starting a job for yourself and starting a business. And now we're going to hone in on that business aspect and see specific models that have high growth potential and how you can get into that growth model.
When I'm speaking with people, they tend not to be thinking of that scalable business model. They tend, as we said, it's creating a job for themselves, some type of small business. Both you and I think our sweet spot is scalable business models. We find that the fun part of entrepreneurship.
And especially because we're very focused on how do you remove yourself from the business? And typically a core component to scaling is getting yourself out of the way. The way we think about businesses lends us into these business models.
Replacing yourself is the ideal for a serial entrepreneur. And I find the challenge the most fun aspect of it.
Let's just define scalable because we might have lost somebody right at the beginning of this episode. What we mean by scalable is a business model that refers to the ability to grow or increase revenue without being hampered by your structure or available resources. Typically, the biggest available resource is your time. It's also money constraints. And if you're using raw materials of any kind, those can be available resources as well. So how can you continue to grow without getting stuck in the weeds by any of those resources?
We had done a podcast episode about control versus uncontrolled growth, and that's some of the areas that you deal with. If you have those restrictions, both the entrepreneur's time and then also the limited resources, you can outgrow the business and start up very rapidly and have a quick U-turn to a failed business.
Just so everybody's thinking of the right thing, when we're talking about scalable, think about the big unicorns of Uber, Amazon, Airbnb. They were small companies for periods of time and managed to grow very, very rapidly because they had set their business models up to allow them to be able to do that. So I hope somebody listening is the next owner of the next Airbnb, but that's what we're all going for.
Even if you don't hit that level, there's different plateaus in the scalable model. So there's a lot of very successful scalable ventures that we've never heard of.
Without a doubt. And those are the next successes that are yet to be uncovered.
Basically, you want to have a self-sustaining business that has some type of escalated rapid growth.
Let's get into potentials of how you do that. Ironically, we were just talking about this before we got kicked off onto the meeting, is automation. How do you automate behaviors so that not every single time that action needs to be taken, you're using somebody's time, whether it's yours or one of your employees?
Today is a great time to do a scalable venture versus even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, definitely, because the infrastructure and technology is accessible in such a wider variety with more options that you can build that into play. But I agree with you. The infrastructure and technology applications are key to scaling your business.
Once you've gone through your business and automated everything that you possibly can, and again, that's just allowing procedures to happen without time being involved in it. The second biggest one I would talk about is standardization. This may be more applicable for physical businesses, but if you're using 10 different parts, how can you eliminate some of those parts and maybe only use 3 or 4? That's going to allow you to grow more quickly, have less inventory. Standardization can even take place in technology businesses.
Standardization also allows more consistency because the more your hands are away from the wheel, and you're relying on other people or technology, you want to make sure that your system is in place so that there's a consistent deliverable to your customers.
I was trying to come up with a good example for standardization so people could really wrap their head around that, because my mind goes to manufacturing, and not a lot of people have had a lot of insight into manufacturing. And then I thought of McDonald's. McDonald's has done an unbelievable job of standardizing their processes. And that's why they're now all over the world producing a very similar product to the consumers, so that if you're going anywhere, you know exactly what you're going to get. And it's allowed them to scale as quickly as they have.
Great minds think alike, because that was the example I was just going to bring up was McDonald's. Have you ever watched the movie The Founder? It's about, they start with Ray Kroc getting involved with the McDonald's brothers. Interesting movie. But the McDonald's brothers really created that standardization process. That was their genius.
And obviously it's worked. Think across business. It doesn't just have to be in machinery to become a standardization process. You can do this in your business virtually no matter what you're doing.
How can you break down that process to a simplicity? Because that allows for the standardization of the operation. When it gets complex, then it's much more difficult to standardize.
The next scalable business element, I would say, is low operational costs. As you said, with the world we're living in, this is becoming easier, which is something we should all take advantage of. Low operational costs, essentially, how do you increase profit and decrease margins? How can you decrease your overhead? Do you need a traditional office space? Do you need the water cooler, snacks, and things like that? How can you bring down the cost of input so that the output can be more focused on?
You're talking about the cash flow components of the strain of driving a business. And if you can minimize that, like, for example, you can create a very successful, robust business selling tangible goods where you never touch it if you have Amazon handling it all for you. That makes things unbelievably more efficient for you than versus having that inventory in hand, having the process, take the orders, be able to ship it out, where Amazon has a structure very effective that has a platform underneath the hood that can deal with that with businesses.
That's exactly right. Amazon's just one example. There are dozens of businesses out there that can help automate, being our first one, reduce costs and simplify. You referred to it as under the hood, but have solutions that are immediately accessible for you.
We use Stripe for our collections. That's an automation that makes it simpler to both process financing and to collect financing. It gets transferred directly into the bank account. Very seamless when you set it up. We also use Calendly for our appointments. That's another example of using technology.
I'm a huge fan of Calendly. I actually don't know what I would do in my life without it. They virtually ensure that I am going to show up when I need to show up places.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. Yeah, nobody's perfect.
That's an inside check for those listening.
So those are really the key elements that I focused on when I was thinking about how we can create scalable business models. Did you have anything else that we should consider?
Managing people is something that you can use technology for your operations. As you're experiencing right now, we just had a conversation. When you are bringing employees on, that complicates the process much greater. You can use technology and automation to handle a lot of your hiring and HR components.
And there are some out-of-the-box solutions that can help with the legal aspect of it as well.
And another one I would add is marketing and customer relationships. There's a lot of technology that are developed that you can utilize marketing. And now AI is getting very deeply involved with that. That adds another layer of application. Makes it a little bit more complicated at this point in time, but it's still, there's a growth area in dealing with your marketing and customer relationships using technology.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it. AI is changing that industry very rapidly at the moment. It's a fun thing to stay on top of, honestly.
I can't disagree with that, but it is a challenge, I would acknowledge.
I deal with it every day. People will come up with the craziest things that I've never even thought of or never seen as an application before. It's moving so incredibly rapidly at this time.
Ryan, before we continue, I'd like to address an important issue for the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast. Creating a quality podcast with valuable content is very time consuming and has substantial costs to create and produce. To cover these costs, Many podcasts use a paid subscription model. Others use a sponsorship model. We prefer not to implement either of these options. I would like to address a concept called value for value podcasting.
While we enjoy creating value for our listeners, providing insights that enhance their entrepreneurial success, it would mean the world to us if our audience would also give some value back to us to support our efforts.
One might wonder, how can you support our show? Well, it's simple. Sharing our podcast with friends, colleagues, or on your social media is a fantastic way to give back.
Also, we love receiving your feedback, comments, or even just a cheerful email.
Or consider making a monetary contribution through platforms such as Venmo or Substack.
You can also support us by setting up a bill payment through your bank. This method allows you to send a contribution directly to our physical address.
Every bit of support counts, whether it's tuning in, sharing our episodes, or contributing financially. Each contribution helps us cover production costs and improve the podcast.
Check out our website at prospirit.com, where you can find more details on how to support us. Every contribution, no matter the size, makes a massive difference. Decide for yourself, what is the value of this episode to you? Let's do this together. We provide value and you return value. Value for value podcasting.
Thank you for being a part of Let's Get Entrepreneurial. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
Speaking of challenges, there are some challenges with scalable business models that we should acknowledge because as we've described it, we're describing the holy grail of business models, but there's a reason that they're not always successful.
Definitely. And I think of overexpansion risk. You are increasing your risk dramatically because you're moving fast and furious. You still have all those balls you're juggling. There's a higher probability one of those is going to drop from a higher distance and it's going to smash, make quite a thud.
That's exactly right. The big one I see is compromising on quality. You've got a product or a service that you're offering that's really high quality and people are loving it. And you go through this rapid growth period. Again, product, service, online business, it doesn't really matter. And the quality decreases quite dramatically during that growth period. And you end up losing some of the goodwill that you've established with those early customers.
If you're not paying attention, that lack of quality or consistency will happen. You don't even notice it.
We tend to put blinders on when we see growth numbers happening. We've talked a lot about me being a huge fan of KPIs. KPIs can look amazing when you're growing because you're running through it. It's only when you take a second, do the 10,000 foot flyover that you realize your churn rate has gone through the roof. So you're not retaining clients through that growth process and you can start to see the cracks happen.
One others that I see that's a challenge is adapting to change. You're moving so rapidly to make that turn or that pivot is much harder to change the direction of your venture because of the speed, but change is happening whether you like it or not. And you have to be conscious of that and start making those adjustments very rapidly and paying attention to this.
Another one, we've already talked about it a little bit, but cash flow considerations. I've seen many businesses fail because of a stupid cash flow problem that they can't resolve because of the rapid growth. That sounds like an oxymoron that you should be able to solve cash flow if you're growing quickly, but it can be the death of you if you're not able to get materials or resources in fast enough, whether that's physical materials or people or whatever it is, and it can absolutely just trip you.
A lot of consulting I've done over the years, typically the client will say, I need to increase my sales. That's my problem. And you dig down into it, and the problem is cash flow. It's not increased sales because they think if I sell more, I can pay the bills. But that actually can magnify the problem if you're not paying attention to your cash flow. I had one friend that was running a business. God, this must have been about 20, 30 years ago. He came to me very excited, saying that he had experienced something like 3 times sales increase for every month for like 4 or 5 months. He was so excited. And my reply was, I hope you are visiting your banker and making sure your line of credit is established. And he didn't understand what I was talking about. Well, he outgrew his manufacturing capabilities, outgrew his personnel, and he failed to deliver to the clients that were ordering. And he was out of business within a year.
Yeah, I hate to hear stories like that, especially that situation that you've described is very avoidable.
And it was as simple as talking to the banker, making sure you had your financials lined up.
When you need the money is typically when bankers start going slowly.
Mark Twain said a banker is the person that will loan you his umbrella, but wants the umbrella back when it starts raining.
That's exactly right.
Talk to the banker first. Establish that relationship, and life will be much easier.
We've highlighted the positives to this and how it's possible. We've just quickly gone through some negatives and the stumbling points. Any final thoughts on scalable business models?
Well, I encourage people, if that's an interest of theirs, to pursue it diligently, because as I said at the onset of this, to me, that's the fun, because that's the challenge. If it were easy, everyone would do it. Both you and I like those challenges. But at the same time, you want to prepare for that successful growth while maintaining efficiency and quality. That's a key. If you don't do that, you probably will crash and burn.
Without a doubt. A dire warning to end the episode on there.
Well, be careful and be prepared, and hopefully we have good news and you can cash out, and we'll see you on the golf course.
Love it. Let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
We extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.